What does speaker view mean?
You only see the speaker.
Oh, okay.
I know like 3 Zoom things. That happens to be one of them.
Greetings all.
Hi, Richard. If you, Lydia, if you click on gallery, you'll see everybody. Well, as many as will fit on your screen.
Yeah, and then I see where it says setting up Zoom, setting up classes in Zoom. Am I supposed to be seeing that?
Yeah, that's my screen that I'm sharing.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I see the gallery.
So we're introducing ourselves and sharing any issues that we may have had scheduling Zoom sessions with students or issues with security settings.
Eric?
Yeah.
I noticed something here that if in the chat box, the choices are everyone or to you. And I've noticed in other chat boxes that you can access anybody on the meeting. Have you limited that to you and everyone?
I have, yeah. I'm
How
glad
do
you
you do
noticed
that?
that. We'll look at that. That's actually one of the things we're going to look at.
Oh,
I'm glad
great.
you noticed that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So part of this is if I was curious to know if there's any other issues that I have some stuff planned for, of course, but I was wondering if there's any other things that we should be talking about as we're working on this. I'm just looking through the chat right now, just to share a couple things that people have said here. Let's see. Moya mentioned that waiting room feature disappeared for her over the summer and she's interested in more security. I'm wondering if anybody else has had the experience of losing the waiting room option.
I haven't wanted to use it because any of my students who maybe haven't been online before, I want them to feel welcome. So I just open it up and nobody who shouldn't be there has come. I just want it to be as easy as possible for them to come in.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the balance we're looking for, right? We're looking for something that's easy, but at the same time, we need to make sure that nobody shows up who shouldn't be there. I wonder if anybody had been in a meeting where someone showed up that wasn't supposed to be there?
Yeah, several times. Yeah, my classes, like, it seems that some people got the username, I mean, the ID number from other students, and maybe those students who crashed the class weren't even in the school for like a year or two, and then they just crashed into my class, and or like they weren't even students anymore, or maybe they were in a different class and they just can come in, like, with all they have to do is get the ID number.
Yeah, has that happened with anybody else
I'd
or
like
anything? Yeah, thank you, Lydia. Appreciate that. Anything similar?
I mean, they can be kicked out, but I'd rather them not come in the first place.
Yeah, right. Let me see, I'm just looking at some of the notes here. Stephen talks about having trouble scheduling and hosting meetings. The registering students for recurring sessions feels overwhelming. And I thank you for sharing that, Stephen. I'm recommending an approach, but I do recognize that it's not appropriate for all classes, and individually programs and teachers will need to make decisions about whether this works for you. There are a few things that I felt that did work for me, and I'll talk more about that, but individually you should make your own decisions. Let me see here. Any other issues that came up? Some people are still waiting for, Daphne said she's still waiting for a CUNY First ID, and so that she has her, her full professional Zoom account. Is anybody else in that situation where you're waiting for CUNY First? Yeah, Stephen. So maybe some Lehman teachers I know are in that situation, right?
Yes.
Right. How many people here, just by a show of hands, 'cause I think I can see everybody, maybe, or most people, how many people have do have the unlimited Zoom or the CUNY Zoom account?
Yeah, I have.
It's just finishing. We're waiting. The Lehman people are waiting for the other one.
Yeah, I have it. Is it just me or the volume is low?
You.
It's me?
Is anyone else having trouble hearing me? So you may
No.
try and turn up the sound on your own in your computer if there's a way to do that,
Turn off the sound?
or turn
Turn
up
it
the
up.
sound. So turn up the sound.
On your
Do that.
speakers.
On your keyboard, there's a place where you can turn up the sound.
Might depend on the computer. I'm not. If that's
No, I don't see that.
true for me, but I'm not sure if that would be true for everybody. I'm just seeing if there's any other issues here.
Let me try the microphone.
Andrea talks about, let's see, some students not knowing how to use Zoom well, many or most only having phones.
And I have
Sometimes losing students. You want to say more about that, Andrea?
just that when it was in person, a certain core of students always came, and I have much more trouble getting them to show up regularly this way. And sometimes they go off to cook dinner and will come back at the end of the hour, or just keeping them engaged and willing to come back the next week has been very difficult, which it wasn't in person.
Yeah. Anybody else having that experience?
Yeah, I'm
have
also having trouble. Like, someone joined my class. He was driving, and I told him that he can't do that. So he pulled over, and he was just in his car. Like, I really want them at a desk or table. I don't want them in the car. I don't know. Like, am I being too controlling?
I've just been feeling that I'm so lucky to get them that, even if they have a child or two on their lap, or they're in the car or walking down the street, I just try to welcome them no matter what. Maybe that's wrong.
Well,
I don't
that's
know.
very patient of you.
I don't know. Like, I feel like it's a virtual classroom. So virtual classroom, it's a classroom, but it's virtual. But that doesn't mean that they can just be doing anything. I don't know.
Usually, I have had, usually the first couple of seminars are covering netiquette, and you just have to have these, like, you, as positively as you can phrase it, but setting up for success, just act as if you're in the classroom, get dressed, take a shower, have breakfast. These are things that people forget because they're home, I think,
I can't see you, whoever is talking. Does everyone else have only like 4 people on the screen? And I have the big white background with a lot of writing on
So
it.
Eric is sharing the screen, so you're going to see the majority that. The people are along the side. Okay,
Now
so
I see
click off the
everybody.
screen share so that you can see. Andrea, when it's like that, at the bottom there is a little arrow, and if you click the arrow, it goes to the next group of people.
You can also do
Yeah.
grid view. Grid view allows for more in the shared screen. There's thumbnail, there's the one that's 4 people, and there's also grid view. And grid view allows you to make like by dragging the corner, allows you to see more people. So you don't have to scroll as much.
Yeah,
Even when you're sharing the screen?
When you're sharing the screen is what I'm
I
talking
could see everybody when he was sharing the screen because I dragged the gray corner
Yeah, exactly.
across the screen, which is what I do with my students.
Yes.
Drag
You have
gray
to have
corner.
it in settings set up. I can't recall what it's called.
Side by side or something.
Side by side. Yeah.
It's at the top left of the corner when the screen is shared. You'll see 3 little dots. One is thumbnail, one is something else, and one is grid view. And grid view allows for the most.
I see recording and a green button and something else.
You won't see it right now because Eric isn't sharing the screen. Would it be helpful if you did that again, Eric?
But in the upper right-hand corner, you might also have gallery view, which lets you see everyone.
Okay, so he's sharing the screen again now. Now everybody can explain to her what to do.
Yes, so there is,
Yes, please.
if you go to the top left of where the cameras are, there is
Yes.
hide thumbnail video. The next one is small active speaker video. The next one
I
is,
don't have that. I don't have that. I just have meeting information, a green one and a red one.
It
Uh,
may
It's not on the left, it's on the top right corner of the black.
Oh,
Maybe you should share your
Okay.
screen.
Well,
where it says view
I
options.
can share that.
So I'm going to actually interrupt for a second. So, Andrea, what I would recommend is that we set up a time, and I'm making this offer to everybody here, that if there are like specific issues that your questions about Zoom that you want to solve, let's make some time. I'm happy to go to work it out together.
Yes, please.
I'm actually doing I'm
Yes.
doing an introduction to Zoom workshop this Thursday, and I'll share the information on that. So that's not this
Thank you for
workshop
that,
though.
yeah.
So because this workshop today is really about how to set up classes in Zoom. It's not how to teach with Zoom. So I just want to make that clear right now. It's like, so in terms of the learning how to use it, how to teach with it, how to share windows, all that stuff. I'll have separate workshops on that, and I'm having one on Thursday. I appreciate, and I mean, there'll be times for us to answer some questions about that stuff as we go, probably. But the main focus here is the settings in Zoom, how to schedule classes, and with a specific focus on recurring classes and registration. Neither of which are required, but which I think are pretty useful, and it's up to you to decide whether you want to use them or not. So I'm gonna jump in. I took some notes on some of the specific issues that folks are having, and hopefully we'll get to some of those. Here are my goals for today. We'll see how far we get. We're going to start by looking at settings, the Zoom settings, and there's some specific options that I'm going to ask you to take a look at related to private chat. Donna brought that up earlier. Maybe co-hosting, if that's something that ever becomes useful. Polling, where you can ask your students, you can put up a question on the screen and they can respond, and you can see what percentage responded one way or the other. That, screen sharing and breakout rooms. We're not going to practice using all of those features, but we're going to look briefly at some settings that are important to choose if you want to use them. So if you want to use breakout rooms, if you want to use screen sharing for your students, if you want your students to share their screens, there's some options in settings that you have to look at. Then we're going to look at recurring meeting sessions. So a way of scheduling your classes throughout the semester so that you don't have to schedule them individually. We're going to set up a registration for a sample Zoom class so we can see how that works. And practice approving registration, sending links to registered participants. And then even customizing an automatic confirmation letter. You may have noticed that the confirmation letter you got for this meeting had some notes in there about what we were going to do today. And that was a message that I wrote to you within Zoom, so it would automatically send you the information for the meeting, but also include other notes that I wanted. And one last thing, I found out just last week that Zoom now takes attendance for classes, for meetings. This is something that's brand new. Like last semester I taught over in the spring and in the summer. I don't think Zoom did this at the time. I was taking screenshots of my students, trying to figure, so I could look, so I could mark attendance after the fact. And I've heard of teachers, having everyone put on their video at the beginning of class so they could take attendance. That's something you still could do, but it's actually not necessary. You can look into your Zoom account afterwards and see who actually showed up and how long they were there, which is a really nice feature, and I think it's brand new. One thing I wanted to note is that on on your computer, if you haven't updated your Zoom account recently, I recommend that you do it. Don't do it right now, but there are some features and some settings and things like that that won't show up if you haven't updated your account, or you updated the client, or updated the program on your computer. And it might be pretty frustrating if you're trying to do something that doesn't work. So currently the version is 5.2.3. And these updates don't happen automatically. So I recommend that you get in the habit of once every couple of weeks checking to see if your Zoom client has been updated. I'll give you a link later on if you want information on how to do that. Okay, before we get into the settings though, I want to show you just a little bit. This is an excerpt from a memo that came from CUNY about Zoom security. I'm not sure if this is familiar. Anyone seen this before? It was sent out in the spring after there was a bunch of issues with Zoom bombing, people showing up to Zoom meetings unannounced and doing kind of horrible things. So there was a lot of, it was a lot of information in the news, there was a lot of hubbub in the news. The Department of Education dropped Zoom as a possibility for K through 12. And CUNY's response was to issue this security memo about settings that we should have when we use Zoom. So take a minute and I'm curious about what you notice when you look through this chart. Is anyone else hearing echo now? I think there was an echo I know a few minutes ago, but I think maybe it's gone away now. So go ahead and speak up or share in the chat. What do you notice when you look at this chart?
Well, there are some issues that are required and some that are recommended.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
That there are some fairly tight controls over how to conduct the class or how to conduct your Zoom interactions.
Anything surprising to you here, or anything you didn't know about?
I didn't hear her at all.
Or don't use your PMI, your personal meeting ID, which is what I did for my class last spring. Once I finally understood what I needed to do. That.
Daphne, could you repeat the last sentence, please?
That's surprising to me that they're recommending that you not use your personal meeting ID. That is something that I did once I finally understood that I could have one, and it allowed me to have the students come into class using the same invitation and password with each class because they were using my PMI. So, I'm curious to find out how to conduct a class without using my PMI and what is the advantage or what am I supposed to do with the PMI I was going to say if not for class, I guess for my own personal use, but that's something that I'd like to know more about, how to do the class without using my PMI.
Does anyone have an answer to that question? My understanding is the PMI is sort of, the personal meeting ID, you might use that for an impromptu meeting. I mean, that's the way I would use it. Maybe if I had to meet with a couple people, colleagues, it's not necessarily a scheduled meeting. I'm just sort of starting a meeting and maybe I send a quick email to somebody, hey, let's get on Zoom and we'll talk for a few minutes.
I have a recommendation. So,
go ahead, Mariana.
With the PMI, what ends up happening is that because that's a fixed ID, if it's constantly used, then now that we have the waiting rooms and the passcodes, it's a lot easier, but then you get more crashers. So if you set up a separate meeting, someone can just join that with that same ID. If you set up recurring meetings with generated IDs, they're all different. So no one can crash other than the person that just has that specific ID.
Okay, and Eric, you'll show us how to do that. Thank you, Mariana.
No worries.
So when you schedule meetings, you're going to get a different ID every time you schedule a meeting, right? So if you use a personal meeting ID, you're using the same ID each time, as Mariana said. So that increases the danger that you're going to have somebody there who shouldn't be there. Because if you use the same meeting for all your classes, meeting ID for all your classes, that sort of becomes a problem, right? It could get shared.
So a quick question, if I may.
Yes, Richard, go ahead.
Thinking back to when I was doing Zoom back in the spring, I didn't do all these checks or anything. Now that's required?
It has been since, I would say, March, actually. This isn't actually new.
Okay.
It's been updated, but it's not new, yeah.
But it does require my actually going in and doing those things?
Well, let's look at it real quickly. So the first one, not publicizing Zoom on social, meeting on social media, public forums, nothing to be done, just, on your own. Setting a password for all meetings, there is a setting for that. So you should use a password for all meetings. We can look at how to do that. Some of the other stuff is sort of a default. By default, it's off. For example, turn off file transfer. This is a way to upload files within the chat. Zoom allows for that, but you shouldn't turn it on. So there's nothing really for you to do, but you shouldn't use it because, anyway, it's not going to be on by default. Updating the Zoom application to the most recent version, well, we talked about that. You would have to do that yourself, and it's a security measure to do that. So like every few weeks, I recommend that you just take a look to see if it's up to date. We talked about the PMI. Disabling private chat, we'll look at that together. So Donna mentioned that. That's private chat is where, I might be able to write to Richard individually and he writes back to me. The way I have it set it now, I'm the host, I can write to everybody individually, but currently I don't believe you can write to each other privately. And that's a setting that they would prefer. They don't want participants in a session to be able to harass each other, I guess is the assumption that might happen. But so that you have to turn that off if you don't want the private chat to be available. These other things are recommended, they're not required. Screen sharing to host only. I actually like to have students share their screen. So I believe if the security measures are safe otherwise, and I know who's in the room, then I'm not worried. If my students understand what's appropriate, then I'm not worried about them sharing their own screens. But there is some work to do by making sure that the classroom, that people aren't showing up who shouldn't be there. Because if you have somebody who shows up who shouldn't be there, and you have screen sharing allowed for all people, people, this has happened, right? That people will crash a meeting and then put a bunch of pornography on the screen, right? This has happened. I was in a meeting where this happened. I wasn't the host. So but we really want to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen. It's traumatic, it's horrible, right? So
that is horrible.
So we do have to make sure that people aren't showing up uninvited. Locking meeting after all participants have joined, they recommend that. I don't recommend that. Again, we have to make sure that people shouldn't be, but it's a sort of a last ditch effort, like if you just, can't figure out why people are, you can kick somebody out and they keep coming back, you kick them out, you can lock the meeting and then nobody can come in, but that means your students who are late can't come in either, right? Turning off annotation when not needed is maybe not a bad idea. You can turn it on when students want to use it. Annotation is writing on the screen, right? And you can allow students to do that, or you can allow just yourself to do that. And then the waiting room is where people have to wait and you have to individually let them in one at a time. I don't really like the waiting room that much myself, and I didn't really use it today. As you know, I don't know if you noticed, but when you connected today, a couple of people were pretty early, like 10, 15 minutes early. They had to wait because I hadn't turned the waiting room off. But for myself, I tend to turn the waiting room off when I'm really starting the meeting or starting the class. But I can only do that because I've used registration and I know exactly who's supposed to be here today. If it was wide open that anybody could come, I would have to use a waiting room to make sure that people aren't showing up who shouldn't be here. So this is one of the reasons why I like registration, because it lets me know exactly who's expected today. If I just share a meeting ID and password, which is quite often we have done this in the past, or that's the easiest way to share information, right? If I just give a meeting ID and a password to all my students, and it's the same for everybody, it's definitely the easiest. But it does mean for myself, I have to have a waiting room because I don't know who's going to show up. Anybody could show up. So, and they could share it to themselves. They could be students who are running the program, all that stuff. Go ahead, Andrea. You're muted, Andrea. Go ahead.
Are you talking to me?
No, I'm sorry. Andrea, I think, was trying to share, but she's muted.
Okay.
I mean, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Are the students getting some instruction? Because like my students, if they got in the waiting room, they would sort of panic and what is this? And are they getting the same kind of instruction that we're getting? Because if they have no idea.
Mm-hmm. That would be up to your program to decide how that's handled, right? So students go through intake, orientation, registration, whatever they do at your program. That would be up to, that may be different in different campuses. Some campuses I know are doing some orientation on how to use Zoom, but I don't know how it's handled at every campus. That would really depend. So
because if they don't know how to do it, a lot of mine started calling me on the phone, panicking while the class was going, saying, you know, I'm stuck, I can't get in, and stuff like that.
We have to teach them, and we have to teach our students how to do that. It's not coming from the program.
I see.
That's another reason why actually I don't. I'm sorry, I'm gonna mute you, Andrea, because I'm getting some echo. Sorry. That's one reason why I prefer not using a waiting room, because I feel I'm going to lose my students who are in a waiting room and don't know how to get into class. If I don't use the waiting room, they can come on in. But it seems to me if you don't use a waiting room, then you have to use registration. Because if you give people a meeting, an ID and a password, and they can share it with anybody, then you have to have some way of knowing that the people who are coming into the group are the ones who should be there.
Yeah, Eric, how do you do the registration?
I've been waiting for you to ask. There we go. So.
Well, Eric, before we finish this, can I just mention something?
Please.
I think when you're on Zoom and somebody Zoom bombs, there's a way of getting rid of them, right? So you can tell your students to not panic, prepare them before, and if that happens, you can oust that person and still keep your class, right?
It's true. It's true. Yeah, if it's just one person. I mean, if you haven't shared information on social media, it's probably unlikely it's going to happen. But it's not that unlikely students will share it with another student.
Yeah, it happens.
It happens.
I never put my class on social media, but they share it with each other.
Yeah. You could kick individual people out, but it's possible you won't know who they are because you don't have their names. The other thing that happens, let me unshare for a minute here. The other thing that happens when you don't use registration is that people show up by whatever screen name they put in when they log in. And so an issue that's happening for me is that a lot of students were just showing up as iPad or iPhone or Galaxy or something, and I didn't know who my students were. I would ask them and I would remind them and I would show them how to change their screen name, but quite often they didn't do it, and it was just, for me, it was tedious. And then so people show up and they could type in any name. I don't know who's who, so it's a little hard to kick people out when you don't know who's who. I don't know if other people have had the same issues.
Yeah.
Eric, is there any way to have their screen name set for the duration of a semester or of whatever period?
There is, yes. So what I have to say is that all this stuff comes with pros and cons. So let's look a little bit, let's look at some of this stuff. So I'm gonna back up a little bit. So what you're saying, the part about people's name showing up is fixed for the semester is something you can do with registration, but there are drawbacks to it. So it's up to you to decide whether that works for you. let's back up a little bit here and talk about how to log into these new accounts. So not everyone has their CUNY accounts yet, but I want to point out that the sign-in is a little bit different, and I just, in case people have had trouble signing in, hopefully everyone can see my Zoom webpage here now. Okay, I might make it a little bit bigger here. Let's see. When I sign in here, oh, that's nice. It knew what I wanted, but it's not helping me, unfortunately. Let's see here. Okay. There we go. So this is what normally you will see when you log into the browser. This is what the first step, like in terms of dealing with the settings and scheduling meetings, you need to do it through a browser, right? So when you sign into your Zoom account, in the past, or if you had your own personal account or something that wasn't a CUNY First account, you probably filled in username and password here. But for those of you who have new accounts, you may have noticed that you have to use this SSO login. So this is something to take note of if you haven't used it yet, that when you use your CUNY First account for Zoom, you're going to need to use SSO to log in. And then what it asks for is your company domain, and that's CUNY. So it's cuny.zoom.us. Then you hit continue. And now it's going to take you to a CUNY First login, which will, I have mine set, automatically to go here. But now it's logging in with CUNY First through a CUNY website, and then it takes us into the Zoom account. So just look for SSO if you're having trouble logging in. Let's see here. Okay, so let's look at the settings first. A couple things to point out in settings. Hopefully this is familiar for most people, what this screen looks like a little bit. There are three main areas in here that are important for you, I'd say right now. Meetings is where you schedule meetings, where you edit, you update meetings, where you can start meetings as well. Settings, which we're going to look at right now. And then this third section is reports. And this is where you can see attendance. There's other stuff is here as well, but if you're looking for attendance, it's under reports. We'll come back to that in a little bit later. So under settings, there's a few things that I want to point out. If you want to use a waiting room, you'll notice mine is off. But if you want to use a waiting room, then this needs to be on. Otherwise, it won't come up as an option. So Moya, I'm wondering if it's possible that yours was just off, because I think you said it disappeared this summer. So I'm wondering for other people that this setting, in order to use a waiting room, this has to be on.
I had it on. Maybe it's because I didn't update my Zoom. It could have been I didn't do the update, because I had it set it and then suddenly it just one day wasn't there.
Yeah, I would try updating. Yeah, see if that helps.
Thank you.
Sure. I leave my waiting room off for now. You can still set it to use it for individual meetings, but if you turn it on here, it'll be used, I think, in every meeting you schedule. A couple other things to point out. Daphne, you were wondering about, like, as an individual thing, if you want to require passcodes for meetings, which I think you'll need to for classes, right? If you turn this on, then you'll always have a passcode. It'll be automatic, or you can change it yourself. But if you turn this on, it'll always use a passcode when scheduling new meetings. And I do recommend that. I think it's required, actually, at least if you're meeting with students. And also, if you're using your personal meeting ID, which maybe for other meetings, I would recommend using a passcode for that as well, but don't use it for scheduling classes. So I can't cover everything here, but I do want to point out a couple other things that you'll want to use. This is an option that I think is kind of interesting, join before host. If you're using a waiting room, you wouldn't really use join before host, because a waiting room, it waits for you to log in and let people in individually, right? But if you use registration, and if you know people who are, you're only the people who are going to show up are students who should be there, this is something you can turn on, which would allow them to join the meeting, start talking to each other before you even show up. It's not something you would have to use, but it's something you could use if you felt comfortable. It feels to me like it would be a nice thing to do, but I feel like it's probably only possible if you use registration. If you have registered a list of students who are registered and they're the only students who could possibly show up, allowing them to join the session 15 minutes early, they could do some review of their homework. It doesn't seem like a bad thing to me, but it's something to consider. I mean, maybe programs would decide whether that's something they would want to do or not. It's something I tend to turn on, especially when I'm meeting with people, with colleagues. I always turn this on. Otherwise, they're stuck waiting for me to join a meeting. And if I'm 5 minutes late, they're stuck waiting and they can't start talking to each other. So if you're using this for colleagues, I would definitely have this on. Let's see here, a couple other things. Here's the private chat option. My guess is that it's off. I think it's off by default, but allow meeting participants to send a private one-to-one message to another participant. We want to make sure this is off so that students are not able to send messages to themselves individually in the meetings because it's a CUNY requirement. Yeah.
How does that work with the breakout rooms? If you put students in breakout rooms, then they need to be able to chat with each other, right? Or at least to communicate. Does that automatically change when people go into breakout rooms?
This private chat, turning that off doesn't mean that people can't use the chat. What it means is they can't write a message to another student individually, privately.
Right, I understand that, but
so they can always, like, so this actually up here, this other option, this turns the chat on completely.
I know.
Or turns it on, or, turns it off or on completely. So if this is on, students will always be able to send messages to everybody else in the breakout group. They'll be able to send messages to everybody in the class. If they're in a breakout group with, let's say, 4 other students, they'll still be able to use a chat and send messages to everybody in the breakout group.
Okay, so it will isolate that breakout room. People will be able to chat with each other in the breakout room, and only when they come back into the main room will the chat go to everyone in the class.
I see what you mean. Yeah, so in a breakout room, so in a breakout room, the students are only talking to other students in the breakout room. They're only chatting, all the visual, the sound, everything is just within that breakout room, including the chat. So but when they go back to the main room, then it's to everybody again.
Okay.
That's sort of unrelated to this private chat question, because that's just about these individual messages between, let's say, Daphne and Stephen. This means that you couldn't write to each other individually. You'd have to send your messages to everybody publicly.
Can I ask a question along those lines?
Yeah.
This is Gloria. So can I give my students, can I write in the chat, please answer these 4 questions. And then when they go into breakout room, will they have that chat visible to them?
Yeah, my understanding is yes, and my experience is yes. So if you're in a large group with students, you haven't gone into breakout groups yet, you write something in the chat. When they go into the breakout groups, the full record of the previous chat is still available. So that it is still there. It does, like, so the chat follows the individual. So the student shows up. If the student shows up to class late, they won't have anything in their individual chat that's previous to when they arrived.
I see.
And if they go into one breakout room, they won't have anybody else's chat. It follows the individual.
So if you want them to have a 5-question conversation in a breakout group, if you type it in when they're all together, when they go into their groups, those 5 questions will still be in a chat they can access?
Yeah, they should be able to go back and review. Wow. They could scroll up and should still be able to see what's in the chat. Which is nice, because you can't share a screen that's visible to them in a breakout.
Yeah.
Right.
That was my next question.
And is it true?
Does
Is
the
it true
screen
on a
share
phone?
follow them?
Is
I'm
it
sorry,
true
what?
on a phone? On a phone, they can also follow the chat as opposed to a computer?
Should be the same. Yeah, it's the same for whatever device they're on.
Okay, that's good to know.
Daphne, could you repeat what you had said?
That was going to be my question. If the 5 questions are put up in a screen share, when you put people in breakout rooms, does that shared screen go with them into the breakout room or no? Does each breakout room have access to that screen share so that even if a student comes in later and they're not in the chat, they will be able to see the screen share? Or does the screen share only work with the everyone view or speaker view or gallery view or whatever it is when the whole class is together?
Does somebody want to respond to that? Someone who knows?
I think the screen share is not shared when you go to breakout rooms. That's why the chat is helpful, because you can see it in the chat, but not as a screen share.
I think that's correct, unfortunately.
Unless somebody shares their screen in the breakout rooms, but the screen from the original place is not shared.
Yeah, that's a problem because if you want them to discuss certain questions or, you know, now you want them to discuss it in groups, but you can't share it. So it's kind of awkward.
Well,
Yeah,
what
so-
Donna said is that you can share it in the chat. You can put it in the chat and it'll stay there so the people in the breakout rooms can access the chat.
Right.
Not
But that means-
necessarily screen share.
Yeah, right. It's not the same, you know. You have to, sometimes like you want to prepare it beforehand in a document. But all right, I guess that's the
Then
only
you
thing.
can send it to them in Google Classroom. If you share that with them, then everybody has the document, and then somebody can share it in the breakout room. So it's like, it depends how prepared you are. And if you plan ahead, then you can do the sharing beforehand.
It's a good reason why it's useful to teach students to be able to share their screens individually as well. If you have a student in each breakout group who potentially could share their own screen so that everyone else could see what they're sharing, then you have the ability for everyone to be looking at the same thing. But it's really a challenge for sure. Or there are some other way to get the same document, the same questions in front of every student, but it won't be through screen sharing. Not by the teacher. Students in those breakout groups could do it.
And Eric, did you say that you do keep your screen share for all participants on or off? Because
I tend to have it on. Say it again.
The host would have to have screen share for participants on in order for that to happen, whether in the breakout rooms or in the larger group, correct?
Right. So if you take a look here,
Right here.
Right here, right? So who can share?
All participants.
The host or all participants. If you have it set to host, right, then the participants can't share. I tend to keep it for all participants, but you know, you have to make sure that again, it's all this stuff. You can do some of this stuff if your classroom is secure, that you know people who aren't supposed to be there aren't going to be there. If you're not sure, then you should have that stuff off, or you should turn it off and then turn it back on when you want to use it. I tend to keep it on because I like to have my students be able to share, but that's up to you.
Okay.
So just to be clear, they can share with each other in the breakout rooms?
If you have it on here, yes, they can.
Oh, that's all. That's good.
And you can even share from a phone. You can share from any device. So it is possible to do. So let's see, is there anything else here I want to point out? I think that's it. We probably should move a little faster here. Breakout rooms. If you want to use breakout rooms, make sure it's turned on here. By default, it's probably off. So if you want to use breakout rooms, which most of us do, I think, make sure that in your settings, you have it on. Otherwise, you won't even be able to turn it on. You won't be able to turn it on. I was in a meeting last week where we wanted to have breakout rooms, but when we scheduled the meeting, we forgot to have this setting on, and we just couldn't do it. And it was a little frustrating. So make sure that that's on. Okay, So that was all under settings. There's a ton of stuff here. I recommend that you spend some time looking through this. It's not super exciting, but if you're trying to do something and it's not available later on, it can be frustrating, you know, when you get started teaching.
I have one last question, and then
Please.
with regard to breakout rooms, is the assignment of breakout rooms always random, or am I right in saying that you can assign people to specific breakout rooms based on whatever criteria you want? Like if students or some students are working at a certain level and they need to be together so that you can monitor them or assist them, you can assign them to a specific breakout room and other students to other rooms, or it can be random, correct?
Yeah, either one is possible.
Okay.
You can do it manually and make choices about who fits together. That's so. And we'll have a different meeting that I'll let you all know about, where we'll go over how to use breakout rooms, or make a meeting with me individually and we'll talk about it.
I have a quick question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is weird. Somebody had told me that if the students don't unmute themselves before I put them in breakout rooms, they won't be able to unmute while they're there. So I just always made sure they unmuted, but is that even true? I never tried it without it, so.
I don't think that's true.
Okay.
That's not the experience I've had.
Okay, thank you.
Eric, can I ask you a question about polling?
If it's about how to do it, then I would ask that we do it at another time. In order to use it, actually, it's a good point. Let me point out, well, go ahead and ask the question. I just don't know if I can answer it. Go ahead.
I set up a poll, and only like out of 15 or 16 people, only 4 people were able to see it. And I had no idea why.
It's a little challenging sometimes to find the poll on a phone.
Oh.
I think it was available, but they maybe couldn't figure out how to access it. My recommendation with this stuff is that you try it with yourself. Try it with your own phone, try connecting to your own meeting, seeing if you can answer your own poll in a meeting with a phone. My guess is it's something like that. I've had it, you know, I've had meetings where some students couldn't access it, but it's never quite that many who weren't able to access it.
Yeah.
And sometimes people find it a little later. We can, and that's another issue that we'll try and cover in another meeting, or you know, contact me individually and we'll see what we can figure out.
Okay,
I need to move on to scheduling a meeting, since that's part of the main focus here. There are 2 ideas that I want to make sure that people understand, and then you can decide whether you want to use them or not. The first one is recurring meetings, and the second one is registration. So let's schedule a meeting. We'll schedule a class, right? So we go to meetings, we click on schedule a meeting. Let me give you some details about the meeting we're gonna schedule, and I'm gonna use the annotation thing here. Let's see here. So let's schedule a meeting. We'll call it an evening pre-HSC class. Starts let's say the 9/21, and it's going to go to 12/18. I don't know if those precise dates, but those are the weeks that it's going to be running. 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. So it's 90 minutes, and it's Tuesday, Thursday. So we can schedule all these sessions at once. I'm not sure how people have done this in the past, but we can do this with the recurring meetings, so it all happens at once. So I'm going to go here and say evening pre-HSC class. You can put a description of the class here if you like. It's not necessary, but you can. The when here is the start date. So we'll start with 9/21. 10 a.m. And it's 90 minutes, so an hour and 30 minutes here. And to make it happen every Tuesday and Thursday throughout the semester, we want to make it a recurring meeting. So we click on recurring meeting here. Let's see, every day until September 27th. So that's not right. We want to make that December 18th. Why is that happening? October. I'm not sure why I'm grayed out here. What happened here? For some reason it's grayed out and I don't understand why. I think maybe it might be that 50 occurrences is a limit, actually. So we don't want 50 occurrences. Maybe that's the problem here. It's not a daily recurrence, actually. It's a weekly recurrence. I think that's my mistake. So I'm choosing weekly here, and it's not on Mondays. It is repeating every week. It's not
Eric?
Mondays. It's Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Oh.
And now if I go here, okay, that was the issue. Now I can choose December 18th as the end. I think maybe you can't do more than 50 sessions or 50 occurrences.
Mm-hmm.
So it's meeting on Tuesday and Thursdays from 9/21 to 12/18. And so and that's it. So then now if I hit, you notice that it put a password in automatically. I could turn the waiting room here on if I want, but I'm going to leave it off, I think, because at this point, it doesn't matter. I could change it later. Yeah.
I did no fixed time for my summer class.
Say one more time.
I chose no fixed time, and it was like, I just told the students when the class is, and they just went on to the same ID, every time. No, I picked the no fixed time option.
No, okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Sure, that is an option.
I just curious what your opinion is of that.
It's a good question. So there is another option here where you see where it says no fixed time. That is a way that you will get a meeting ID and a password that you could use at any time.
Right.
That is a possibility. You could do that for your class. Yeah, I don't know. For myself, I prefer, let me show you why I prefer this one, and then we can go back and look at that and see when that might be appropriate. For myself, I would personally use no fixed time if it were really something that didn't have a fixed time, like one-on-one sessions,
okay,
office hours, maybe a counseling meetings. I would schedule with no fixed time, because then you could just keep reusing it. It doesn't matter when it happens. But there's something nice that happens when you do it this way, when you actually schedule out the sessions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not using registration yet, so I'm gonna go ahead and save it, and so we can see what happens here. Clear my. So now that I've saved this with the recurring sessions, it created 26 scheduled meetings. You can actually show them all here. So these are all the Tuesdays and Thursdays in that time period. So it's scheduled every one of the classes. If one of them happened on, let's say, Thanksgiving or a holiday, you could delete it. When would that be?
Excuse me, I just have one question. This is Gloria. So can those recurring meetings automatically go to your students?
Yeah, and yes, they can. That's partially why I like it, but right. So let me do one quick thing. So November 24th, that's a Thanksgiving holiday, right? Somewhere around there. I don't know when it is this year. or maybe it's the 26th. That sounds like Tuesday, Thursday. So I'm going to delete this one because there's not going to be a class on that day, right? So what I did is I went up here to show all occurrences. This is after I scheduled the recurring.
26 is a Thursday.
So I'm going to delete it. And so now, it won't show up in the calendar for me or for students if they do use a calendar. So here's one nice thing I like about using recurring sessions is that I use an Outlook calendar. I can click on this, and it's going to go ahead and add them all to my calendar. Scheduled at the proper time. Or I could click on Google Calendar if I use that. It'll upload or download, whatever it is. It'll put all that in my calendar, so I'll get alerts. I'll have the link available. I won't have to go searching for it. It's just in my calendar. Personally, that's why I like it.
Does it work with an Apple Calendar?
My guess is it's going to work. Well, I don't know. Yeah, these are the three options. I would play around and see which one of these works.
Okay.
It does.
My guess is you can get one of them to
with
work.
the iCalendar, Donna. I tried it the other day.
Is that a yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
Which one did you use?
It was the iCalendar.
Oh, it just showed. You got a different option that showed up.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Are you limited to one calendar?
How do you mean?
I don't know. This is where I'm starting to get a little lost. When it's these three calendars that I'm seeing, you're talking about my calendar, not the students who I'm going to send it to?
It's talking about your calendar. These options will show up for anybody who registers for it as well. But like this is saying, you want to add this to your own calendar just to remind you so that you have the pop-up that you can click on to start the class or. But students will get a similar option if they do use a calendar. Let's take a look at that. But for that to be true, you have to use registration. And so is my understanding. So you edit this meeting. We'll go back in here again. You're editing a recurring meeting. Do you want to edit only this meeting or all recurring meetings? I'm going to say all because, all 20 or 25 of those sessions, whatever they were. So.
Question?
Yeah, go ahead, Andrea.
Isn't the whole point of this to send it to the students? Because you know when your classes are. It's not like I need a reminder, the students need it. So that's what I thought it was for.
Yeah, there's more, it does more than one thing. So so I'm about to show you that. Yeah, no, you're right. So maybe that's not very useful, but that's just part of it. So obviously, yeah, the next part is about sending it to students. Normally what would happen, let's back up for 1 second. Normally what would happen when you share this with students is you're going to share something that looks like this, right? I don't know how you send this to students, but you copy the invitation and you have a list of all the sessions. Actually, okay, so I'm wrong. You don't have to use registration. If you send this to students, if you copy and paste this, it will allow them to download the calendar to themselves as well. So I think, Stephen, you had asked that. This is not using registration. This is just using a meeting ID here and a passcode. If you do the recurring meetings, you could copy this invitation and it'll send all this information to students. I don't know how normally you do this. Maybe you just take some of the most important information. Like this is the simplest version, like the link to the meeting, the ID and the passcode, right?
Yes.
So maybe in the past, this is what you've done. Maybe you wouldn't send all this other stuff. You wouldn't send all these phone numbers. Not really necessary. But this link here would allow them to download to the calendar if they use that.
Does it send a notice automatically in advance of each meeting for the student to click to, or do they need to type in the meeting ID and the link at the time class is beginning?
Well, let's look at registration. Let's talk about that real quick, because I think some of these questions will get answered by that. So I just want to make clear that recurring meetings and registration are two separate things. They're not dependent on each other. You could do recurring meetings without registration, and you could do registration without recurring meetings. I just think they're both useful, but they're not the same thing, and they're not dependent on each other. Registration, so I'm turning it on to say it's required. This is how this meeting you're in right now was set up. So I set up registration. You had to fill out a little form to request to join, and I approved it, and you got an automatic email from Zoom with connection information, right? So what I'm recommending is that we do something similar with students. So this first option is what we need here. Attendees register once and can attend any of the occurrences, and that's it. You click on registration required. You hit save, and then that's it. Now, if we look at what we're sending to students, if we copy invitation, it's a much simpler invitation here. You'll notice that the meeting ID and the password is not included here, because in order to come to the class, they need to register. So let me just show you what this would look like here. So I'll copy this link and I'll put it in another browser here. So when they follow that link, this is what they'll get, something like this. Evening pre-HSE class, that's the class that the title. Here are all the individual classes. And a little form that they need to fill out, right? So let's say I fill this out, my personal email address, and I register for the class.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Students have a couple of weeks to change classes, update their schedule, move around. Once this is in place, it's not locked. Is it? How do we accommodate new students who may come into class? They could be added to the class once they do the registration form, or if we send them, if we get new students, people moving around, etc.
Yeah, so in my mind, that's actually works much better than just sending meeting IDs and passwords. In this case, you can update sort of a class roster inside Zoom, and you can always send, I have a new student who shows up, it starts a few weeks late, you send them this registration link, they sign up, and then they're in your class. Or if somebody is no longer supposed to be in your class, then you can remove them, and you don't have to change the meeting ID, you don't have to change the password. They're just not registered in your class anymore, so they can't come. It wouldn't work. So let's take a second and look at what happens now. So I tried to register. Let's see if it works.
You've got 2 minutes.
Here, I'm gonna do another thing. I'll put it in the chat here. If anyone else wants to register.
Can
I ask a quick question?
Please.
Sometimes you forget.
You cannot, for instance, I have my roster of students. I have all their email addresses. I cannot register them myself. They have to get the invitation to register, fill it out, and then I approve it. There's no way for me to do it for them. Is that correct?
Well, you could fill out all these forms, but the forms are relatively simple. So I mean, you could fill out a form. I put a link in the chat. Take a look at the. Go ahead and click on it and see what the form looks like.
Yeah, no, I saw it, but for non-English speakers, for beginning English speakers, it might not be that easy to do.
You could fill it out, but it would still. You could fill it out and put. I mean, you would do it one by one and put in their name, their email address.
So I would send that use that registration link myself, and I would do it. Yeah. And that would work.
It would work. I mean, they would have to find the confirmation emails in their own email to find those links. So let me show you kind of what happens with the registration. I mean, you know this from your own personal experience with this meeting. When you filled out a form I got a notification and then I approved it, and you got an automatic response. The email that you got from the Zoom is similar to what students would get. So it's a question about whether, if you think students will be able to navigate that, are they going to be able to find that email? Are they going to be able to find the link in the email? Are you going to be able to guide them to that? If not, then maybe this isn't the right choice, because this is how they get notified. It's automatic through Zoom.
And it's not, it doesn't notify, if you use WhatsApp to notify your students regularly, this is not going to communicate with WhatsApp, only through email, correct?
It's using their emails that when they fill out their registration, and that's how it's communicating with them. So, for example, look at that. So a few people have already registered for this class we just set up. Thank you for doing that. And so you can see here that Peggy, Asmara, Kate, and I have all registered for the class, right? And by now, I think if any one of us checked these personal emails, we should see an email confirmation, because I had it set to automatically respond. And so they should have the connection information for the class already. If for some reason they lost it, or what I tend to do is that, a couple hours before class or the evening before, I would, let me see, sorry. I would send a quick confirmation email to them, so I can resend the confirmation email. So this is automatic from Zoom. It's not from my personal email address. I'm not going to. Is there
a way to set that up so it automatically sends it like 10 minutes before each appointed class?
Not that I know of. Okay. Not that I know of.
So, Eric, I have a question.
Yes.
Probably coming up in the name of Peggy Conti, but Peggy is disguising her voice.
We see you both. We see you both. Go ahead.
Okay. So for a recurring meeting has its own unique meeting ID. It's not the same meeting ID number all the way through.
No, I think it actually is one meeting ID the whole time for the whole semester.
Because I just feel like I still would want to be sending students a reminder, like the night before or something. I can just, as I do now, just copy the invite and then send it to students. Sort of not. I just don't, trust a kind of automatic reminder structure.
Yeah. So unfortunately, if you use registration, you don't have to use registration.
No, I wouldn't use registration then. Yeah.
Right. If you want to be able to copy and paste a meeting ID and a passcode that's the same for everybody, that you can just send in an email to them, you don't want to use registration.
Okay. Yeah.
Because what happens?
I have everybody in the class in a Google group, and I just send it to the Google group.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you want to do it that way, then you're going to have to use one meeting ID and passcode. What happens when you use registration is that each student has an individual, unique link that will only work for them. And so it means that Peggy, Asmara, Kate, and I can come to the class, nobody else can. Even if Peggy, when she gets this automatic email, let's say, well, look at that, it's in Spanish. You could change the settings so it sends in Spanish. I didn't know that. I don't know how that happened, but in here,
choose the language.
I don't know how to do that. But in here, there's a link to the meeting. I think this is it here. You see it's sort of a crazy link. It's all encoded and it's unique for Peggy. If she copied this and gave it to the rest of the class, it wouldn't work. It only works for Peggy.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really copy it and send it to everybody. It's individual. And if I go to somebody else, Asmara, I mean, it's hard to tell, but it's going to be a different crazy link. It's not something that anyone has to memorize. They just click on it and they're in, but it only works for them individually. If you want to remind them, which I usually want to remind students, you can do it through Zoom by selecting all your student names, clicking resend confirmation email, and Zoom sends it to them automatically. it sends each
Eric,
person
what's-
into
Eric, can I make a
Yeah,
recommendation?
please go ahead, Katia. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
So I know that, when this happened in March, April, what often I think students were frazzled about how to get online. So what I did was I would send them a message through Remind, because that's something I had set up with them before. But I made sure that I emphasize that the link that I'm sending them for the Zoom is always going to be the same, so that they should, mark it somehow, make it a favorite, so that every time that they came to class, they, went back to the same email, and that's how they logged on. So that I'm not sending them reminders about what the link is every single time. I mean, I think that's a responsibility that they should take on themselves, and so that we're not responsible for making sure that they get it every single class time. But if I wanted to send them message saying good morning, I would do it like at 9:15, just to make sure everybody's like coming to class. Then they knew how to get to class. That's the way I dealt with it.
My experience this summer, when I did, 1 second, I used registration in study groups this summer, and my experience was that the first time we met, it was difficult for a number of students, and I did some troubleshooting with them. But that each class, there was less and less issues, and by the end, there were no issues with students getting into class. I think could be more difficult at the beginning, but it's up to you to balance whether you feel like it helps or not. But
So Eric, can I just ask, it's the same, if you use the registration, the link is the same each time for each individual student?
Yes. Yeah, so if they successfully in there once and they bookmark it, they could join your class every week and wouldn't have an issue. The other thing is if they use a calendar, they can add it to their calendar. I mean, I don't know how many students actually use calendars, but if they do, if we taught them how to, it would just be in their calendar. The link would pop up automatically. Let me show you a couple quick things real quick, because we're starting to run out of time here. I had this set here to automatically approve every registration. That's probably not the way I want to do it, because I don't know that everyone who fills out that form really should be in the class. So if I click to manually approve, that means I'll get an email alert, and then I can decide on who's applying, who's registering for the class and who should be there or not. So I tend to use manually approve. But that's up to you. And I do, for me personally, I want an email when someone registers, just to alert me that, someone's signing up for a workshop. And I don't want them to share social media buttons to my registration. I'm not trying to, get people from all over the world joining. So there's a couple things that I tend to set that manual approve, right? There's a couple other options here. I don't know if it's useful or not, but you can actually ask, you can adjust that form that they fill out. I had it just set with name and email. You could add phone number if you wanted, and you could even make it required that they have to give you your phone number, their phone number. I mean, maybe you probably already have that, right? But you could add that to that questionnaire. You can even add some custom questions. So, I don't know, like, what is one thing you want to accomplish in this class, maybe. And if you add that, to make it required, then when people go, let's go look at the registration link again. When they go to this link, you'll see that now it's asking for phone number, and it has this question that I added as well. So becomes part of the registration form.
Do you keep, how do you archive, or do you keep all the registration forms?
It's a good question, right? So it's all in here automatically. It's saved in the reports section up here is one place where you can go get it. But in your meeting, it's actually right here, right? So it says here, manage attendees. I have 8 registrants right now. So I go to edit, and they're all here. They're all approved because I had it set to automatically approve. But here they all are. And if I want to look at any of the registration forms, I can click on, well, here you are, Daphne, right? So I can and I see here's your registration, that you registration on this, register on this date. It was before I had those extra questions, I guess, right?
Mhm.
But I could even cancel a registration, right? Like if you have a student who ended up in the wrong place, or someone who wasn't a student, or somebody came to your class, and I don't know, like unfortunately it happened this summer, I had to drop a student. You know, they acted inappropriately in class or inappropriately in a WhatsApp group, and I had to drop her from the class. When you use registration, you can cancel someone's registration. No offense, but sorry, Daphne, you can't come anymore, right? So, so at this point, Daphne can't. She tries to come to the group. She won't be allowed in, right? It's only those who are approved. I mean, I could change my mind. She did some, she redeemed herself.
I did some restorative justice action.
There you go, exactly.
Eric, what's the pluses and minuses of using this versus sending one link to everybody in LinkedIn or Remind?
As I see it, a couple of the things that I like, that I know who's coming to the group. I see the full list here. No one can come if they're not registered. I can remove someone from the group if I need to. That tends to be unlikely, but or rare anyway. Everyone shows up with their full name. So if I have a large class, these names I'm going to see. I'm not going to see anybody that's iPad or iPhone. These are the names I'll see.
Oh, that's the way you get everybody to turn up with a name, by using this.
Yeah.
Well, that's important. I find that to be important because I end up renaming them in class, and then they disappear, and then they come back and they're back to being iPhone, and that's a good impetus for doing this to me.
So, and let me point out some things. We're kind of getting to the end here. Checking attendance after the fact. If you go to reports, this is this new feature that I think is pretty cool. And actually, Osmara asked, is that the only way to get names all the time? Osmara, did your question get answered? Or did you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's one of the problems I have, what people are saying, where it's hard to manage as people are coming in. So I was wondering, besides registering everybody, is there another way?
Yeah, I think my understanding is that is the way. That's the only way I know about it. It's how to get students to have their full names automatically. I mean, they can do it themselves if they know what they're doing. When they join, they can type in the right name, but
Can I just insert one thing? So if you invite people via WhatsApp and you already have their names in your address book, won't their names come up just as their names, not as their phone numbers?
In WhatsApp, maybe, but in Zoom?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think that affects how they show up in Zoom.
I see. It won't
it doesn't affect Zoom.
So meaning you'll just see their phone number and not their name?
Whatever you do in WhatsApp has nothing to do with how it appears on the Zoom screen. There's no phone number or name. The name is out of Zoom.
Let me show you how to check this attendance, because I think it's pretty useful here. So notice, I'm logged into Zoom through a browser. I'm going down to reports, and I'm going to usage. There are two different choices here. I'm going to usage under reports. And then I want a time frame that includes when my meeting happened. I'm going to show you a meeting that happened last week. So I did this same workshop on the same topic last week. So here it is. It was, when was it? The 10th, I think. Yeah, it was the 10th. So setting up online classes. Let me change something here. Sorry, the Zoom is a little bit big. If I look over on the right here for setting up online classes, you can see that there were 29 people who came. When I see it's blue, it's a link, right? When I click on 29, Now I can see, let me make it a little bit bigger again.
Eric, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Did you ever find that some students had a problem with the registration, like they weren't able to catch on? And I could see some people, I don't know, having like.
Yes. So let me give me 1 second and we'll come back to that. But in terms of the attendance, so if you look here on, you'll see that all the meetings I've had, this doesn't require registration. So this is true for any meeting you have, that you can look and see who came. So I click here, there are 29 people. For some reason, it repeats people sometimes. So I'm going to show unique users so that it doesn't repeat names. I think maybe if I connect and then I disconnect and I connect again, it shows me twice. But as you'll see here, these are all the people who came to my workshop last week. And you can see how many minutes each person was on as well. So this will be true for your groups as well. Now, for me, I'm seeing their full real names because I used registration. If I didn't use registration, let's see if I have another meeting where I didn't use registration. It would show whatever their screen name was, and so that could be confusing if you don't know what their real name was. It has to. The screen name is what they show up with in the attendance here.
All right, Eric, it's Daphne. So the duration in the meeting is being shown in minutes. We're being required in these attendance forms that we have now to put times, specific times coming in and leaving class. I see that you can toggle the columns. Is there an option to put specific attendance times as opposed to duration in minutes?
Not that I know of, but my recommendation, and I'm pretty sure that the policy from Central is that we should be generous about this, and that, you know, I wouldn't say that you should be, if a student comes for, I don't know, 70 out of a 90-minute class, I wouldn't say that you should put down 90 minutes. I think they were there for the class. If someone came for 10 minutes, maybe that's a different question. I mean, you have to make a judgment call, but I don't believe that you need to mark precisely what time they came and went. I think the idea is whether they came for that session or not.
Right. Did anyone else have that understanding from the staff?
Yeah, I did.
We need to put in specific times.
Yeah, that's the DOE timesheet. But isn't that what I'm looking at here? I can barely see it, but it looks like start time. When I saw start time, wasn't the time there?
But isn't that start time for the meeting itself?
When it was next to somebody's name. See, like,
oh, join time and leave time. Okay.
Yeah, there it is.
Thank you.
But I think the attendance form is duration, not specific times, although don't hold me to it.
Okay. Is it the same for ESOL classes though? Maybe.
I think so. We'll know later in the week because we're literally getting them, but I'm pretty sure it's duration.
Okay, but at least I see now, thanks Stephen and Donna, that all of the information is here. Join time, leave time, and duration. Okay.
So there was Lydia asked if students ever have trouble with registration, and the answer is yes. So when I taught study groups this summer, I had students who had struggled to find the email if they weren't comfortable with email, or they were getting an automatic email from Zoom that they couldn't find. It did happen, and I had to do some troubleshooting with individual students on this. One thing I can point out as a solution is if you're sold on registration, but you're trying to figure out how to make it easier, there is a workaround. So if you have one student or a few students that just can't figure out how to connect or can't get that information, you can go find what that unique link is for them. So no offense, Stephen, but let's say for some reason the email is just not getting through to Stephen. You can go to, so actually I'll show you where I went here. I'm in the meeting. This is this same meeting we're in right now, right? I go down to manage attendees where it's, click on view. I can go down to Stephen and I can copy the message he's getting automatically from Zoom. And so maybe I have another way I can get this information to him through WhatsApp or a text message or my own email. Sometimes students will get our email, but they're not finding the automatic Zoom email. This is the link that Stephen needs. Again, it's unique to him, but you could say, okay, I'm going to figure out another way to get this to him. This is your link, Stephen. And this is where you're going to use the rest of the semester. It's not like you have to search for this every week necessarily. If you can put it somewhere where you can find it, this is your link for the rest of the semester. But it's individual to Stephen. It can't be used for everybody. Yeah, go ahead. I just want to just put some information up here. I'm going to hang around a little bit afterwards, but I want to put some information up here to share about some stuff we're doing this fall. I'll put some stuff in the chat here. Just give me 1 second. We'll come back to our conversation. These are some workshops we're doing this fall. I'm putting them in the chat in case you want to follow the links. This is a Schoolology group that we have where we're sharing information among teachers. Please join and ask questions, share information. I'm also doing office hours. These links here are available in this CUNY PD offerings document. So if you want to sign up for one-on-one conversation, Mondays 3 to 4 and Fridays 11 to 12, I'm available, and you can register at one of these links. It's in this document here, this PD offering document. So if you follow that link, and it'll be this. I'm going to send this all to you in the notes if you want to follow any of this stuff later on. The full Zoom security protocol that we looked at a bit of it earlier, that'll be in the notes. There's a webinar from Zoom that's actually pretty good. It's Zoom Meetings for Education. You might watch some of it and skip around. It covers a lot of the basic stuff, how to set up breakout groups and share screens, all this stuff. I think it's pretty useful. It'll be in the notes as well. And then there's some links on setting up registration.